All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. If you are prepping for the UPSC exam, I bet you're diving deep into international relations.
Definitely a key area.
For sure. And even if you're not taking the exam, understanding global power dynamics is, well, crucial for anyone who wants to understand the world.
Couldn't agree more.
Right. So today we're doing a deep dive into global civil society.
A topic that's, well, it's really shaking things up on the world stage.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Now, to put it simply, think of it as this massive network of groups and organizations, working across borders, pushing for change in global affairs.
Yeah, it really challenges how we think about power because we're not just talking about governments calling the shots anymore.
Exactly. It's citizens raising their voices, holding the powerful accountable, and even trying to, rewrite the rules of the game.
It's pretty exciting stuff.
It really is. And in a world where globalization is blurring all those traditional boundaries, well, it's more important than ever to understand how it all works.
Absolutely. Even the idea of a society limited to a single country is becoming less and less relevant.
Right. It's like that old saying, think globally, act locally, but amplified,
Right.
And the source material actually calls this deterritorialization.
Sounds complicated.
It does. But think of it like this. Remember when your favorite band was only popular in your own country? Now, thanks to the internet, they have fans all over the world.
Oh, I see.
Globalization is connecting people and ideas like never before. And that's created the perfect environment for this global civil society to emerge.
That's a great analogy. And this interconnectedness, coupled with all those democratic movements after the Cold War, really set the stage.
Yeah, people realized they could connect and organize across borders to
Yeah.
tackle issues that, well, matter to them.
And this wasn't just happening in one place. It was a global phenomenon.
Exactly. Okay, but there's got to be a spark, right?
Right.
What really ignited this surge in, global activism?
Well, the source mentions countervailing power as a key driver.
Countervailing power. Okay,
Yeah.
break that down for me.
So imagine a seesaw. On one side, you have all this weight, corporations, global markets, driven by profit and economic interests.
Got it.
Now, countervailing power is like a force pushing back on the other side of that seesaw, trying to balance things out.
Ah, okay, so that's where global civil society comes in.
Exactly. They act as a check on the power of corporations and governments, fighting for social justice, human rights, environmental protection, things that don't always make it to the top of the agenda when profit is the main motivator.
It's like a David versus Goliath situation then, with, everyday people banding together to challenge the giants.
You could say that.
Yeah.
And they're using the tools of globalization, communication technologies, education, and even the very framework of global governance to make their voices heard.
So they're using the system to challenge the system. That's interesting. This source also mentions a growing pool of educated individuals who are, well, disillusioned with global capitalism.
Right. They see the inequalities, the environmental damage, and they're demanding a different path.
And they're finding ways to connect with like-minded people across the globe.
Exactly. And ironically, the very institutions designed to manage global affairs, they actually provided funding and opportunities for these groups to, engage and influence decisions.
It's like the system accidentally created the tools for its own disruption, huh?
You could say
I
that.
love it. Now, the source specifically mentions the 1992 Rio Earth Summit as a possible turning point.
Oh, absolutely. It brought together governments, NGOs, activists from all over the world to discuss environmental issues. It was a moment where global civil society really started to take shape.
And show its strength.
Exactly.
And then a few years later, we have the rise of the World Social Forum as a major platform,
Oh, yes, that's a key development. Think of it as the counterpoint to the World Economic Forum.
where all those bigwigs meet.
Exactly. But the World Social Forum, it's where activists, NGOs, and ordinary people gather to imagine and, advocate for a more just and sustainable world.
Okay, so it's clear that global civil society has a lot of, well, power and influence.
For sure. It's a force to be reckoned with.
But are there any downsides to this kind of activism?
Well, of course. Any large-scale movement is going to have internal debates and disagreements, right? So some critics question whether global civil society is truly a united front.
Yeah, I mean, getting everyone on the same page must be incredibly challenging.
Absolutely. And, how do we even measure the impact? Is it all talk and no action?
Those are big questions. And honestly questions worth thinking about if you're prepping for the UPSC.
Definitely. Remember, the exam isn't just about knowing the facts. It's about demonstrating critical thinking
Right.
and, analyzing different perspectives.
So how do we start unpacking this? The source dives into two key players: transnational social movements and NGOs.
All right, let's start with those transnational movements because they can be pretty disruptive.
The rebels of the group.
Kind of. They're like grassroots uprisings, challenging traditional power structures, often using pretty unconventional tactics. And because they're focused on issues that resonate globally, like climate change or human rights, they easily transcend national boundaries.
The source gives some good examples.
Right.
The women's movement, the environmental movement, and the peace movement. These are issues that, well, affect all of us.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that these movements often operate with what we call a post-materialist ethic. It's not just about economic growth or material wealth. It's about quality of life, cultural change, a focus on values beyond just making money.
That reminds me of the New Left ideology, their emphasis on social justice and individual empowerment.
Absolutely. And this ties into what we call the new politics of the anti-globalization movement.
Right, which gained momentum in the late 90s and early 2000s. The Battle of Seattle and all those protests against the WTO and G20.
Precisely. These movements are decentralized, they prioritize participatory decision-making, and they're not afraid to get creative to disrupt the status quo.
But being an outsider, it has its downsides. The source mentions that it can limit their direct influence on policy.
True. They might not always have a seat at the table where those decisions are made. However, they can still drive significant cultural and value shifts. Think about the impact the environmental movement has had on public awareness.
Right, it's a slow burn, but the impact can be huge.
For sure.
Speaking of having a seat at the table, let's shift to NGOs. They're often seen as the more insider face of global civil society.
Yeah, if transnational movements are the disruptors, NGOs are the pragmatists, They're more institutionalized, more professionalized.
And that gives them more access.
Exactly. They can engage with those decision-making circles more effectively.
Makes sense.
It's like they're working within the system to change it from the inside.
And they've had some impressive wins, right? The source mentions their role in the Treaty on Greenhouse Gas Emissions, the ban on landmines.
Right, and their efforts to derail the multilateral agreement on investment, which a lot of people saw as a threat to national sovereignty and environmental protections. It shows that even when working within the system, you can still challenge powerful interests and achieve real change.
That's inspiring.
It is.
But this whole insider status, it also raises some tough questions.
Yeah.
Has that close relationship with power structures compromised their ability to, hold them accountable?
It's a valid concern and something, that UPSC aspirants should think about. The relationship between global civil society and power is complex, and there aren't easy answers.
Right, so it's not all black and white.
Nope.
And to complicate things even more, we're seeing the lines between NGOs, governments, international organizations, even corporations. It's all getting blurry.
Absolutely. You see NGOs receiving government funding, partnering with corporations on projects.
It makes you wonder where their loyalties lie.
Right, and that's what makes global civil society so fascinating to study. It's dynamic, it's messy, and it's constantly pushing us to think critically about power on a global scale.
It's definitely a lot to unpack. We've covered so much already, from those early origins to the key players, even some of the criticisms swirling around this movement.
It's a complex landscape.
It really is, and there's still so much more to explore. We'll be back after a quick break to dive even deeper, especially for those of you prepping for the UPSC. Stay with us. All right, and we're back, ready to keep exploring this fascinating world of global civil society.
Absolutely.
It's really incredible to see how these groups are leveraging their power on a global scale.
What's amazing is they're not just reacting to events, They're actually shaping the global agenda.
Right. They're fighting for human rights, protecting the environment, advocating for fair trade issues that impact us all.
Yeah, it's like they're creating a new blueprint for globalization, one that's more focused on people and less on, just profits.
That's a great way to put it. And for those of you getting ready for the UPSC exam, well, understanding the different approaches of these transnational movements and NGOs, that's crucial.
Definitely. You need to be able to analyze their strategies,
Yeah.
Explain why some succeed while others struggle.
Okay, so let's recap for a sec. Those transnational movements, they're the passionate, often disruptive groups pushing for for radical change.
Right. They're organizing protests, launching boycotts, using those creative tactics to grab attention and, well, hold the powerful accountable.
They're not afraid to make some noise.
Exactly. They're like the conscience of global society, challenging norms, pushing for systemic change.
But then we have those NGOs who are, well, they're often seen as the more pragmatic players.
Yeah, they're working within the system, engaging with governments and those international organizations.
Trying to influence policy from the inside.
Exactly. And because of their, structured, professionalized approach, they often have more success achieving those concrete policy changes. They have the expertise, the resources, the access.
It's like the difference between a bulldozer and a scalpel, right?
Mm.
Both can be effective tools, but they're used in very different ways.
That's a great analogy.
Right. And the source material, it highlights some pretty impressive NGO victories, like their role in the Treaty on Greenhouse Gas Emissions, the ban on landmines.
Right. And don't forget their fight against the Multilateral Agreement on Investment,
Which a lot of people saw as a threat to national sovereignty and environmental protectors.
Exactly. They showed that even when you're working within the system, you can still challenge those powerful interests and achieve real change.
It's inspiring, but this whole insider status, it also raises some tough questions, right?
Sure.
Like, has it made them too comfortable? Have they lost their edge?
It's a valid concern, when you're constantly collaborating with governments and corporations. Does it compromise your ability to be critical? Does it make you less likely to rock the boat?
Right. It's a tricky balance.
It is, and it's something that UPSC aspirants should definitely be prepared to discuss, This relationship between global civil society and power, it's complex. It's constantly evolving.
So there are no easy answers.
Nope, not really.
And then to make things even more, well, complicated, we're seeing those lines blur even further. NGOs receiving funding from governments, partnering with corporations on projects.
Right. It makes you wonder, where do their loyalties lie?
Exactly. And that's what makes studying global civil society so fascinating. It's not a static concept with simple answers. It's dynamic, it's messy.
And it keeps us on our toes.
It really does.
Yeah.
It forces us to think critically about how power operates on a global scale.
And for our listeners preparing for the UPSC, that nuanced understanding is key. The exam isn't about just spitting back facts. It's about demonstrating that, analytical thinking, engaging with these complexities.
So let's break it down a bit for our UPSC focused listeners.
Okay, sounds good.
What are some key takeaways they should keep in mind? What are the big things they should remember?
Well, first, grasp that historical context, How did globalization and the post-Cold War era contribute to the rise of global civil society? Why did this countervailing force emerge?
Right. You can't understand the present without understanding the past.
Exactly. And once you have that foundation, start digging into the motivations and strategies of the different players. Transnational movements versus NGOs. How do they operate? What are their strengths? What are their limitations? How do they interact with each other and with those traditional power structures?
Yeah. Those comparisons are key. And speaking of comparison, don't forget to consider how technology has changed the game. I mean, it's night and day compared to just a few decades ago.
Oh, absolutely. The internet and social media, they've given these groups a whole new arsenal of tools to organize, mobilize, and amplify their messages across borders.
It's a whole new world out there.
It is, and it's something that the UPSC examiners might ask about, so it's worth exploring.
I'm sure they love throwing those curveball questions to see who's really been paying attention.
Oh, yeah.
Speaking of challenging assumptions, I think it's also crucial to engage with the criticisms of global civil society.
Of course, it's not all, sunshine and roses. Ask those tough questions. Is global civil society truly representative? Are certain voices being amplified while others are marginalized? Are these groups truly independent, or are they, influenced by hidden agendas?
Those are all valid points.
Yeah.
Like with any large-scale movement, you have to be willing to look beyond the surface and really examine the power dynamics at play.
Exactly. And here's a pro tip for our UPSC aspirants. Use those real-world examples to illustrate your points, Refer to specific transnational movements, NGO successes and failures, key events that shaped global civil society.
Yeah, that's how you make your answers come alive. It shows the examiners that you've gone beyond those textbook definitions and actually engaged with the real-world complexities of of this topic.
Absolutely. And remember, the UPSC exam is just as much about clear articulation as it is about knowledge. So practice explaining these concepts in your own words. Don't just regurgitate what you've read. Make it your own.
Find your voice, connect those dots, and demonstrate that you understand the true significance of global civil society in shaping our world.
And for our listeners who might not be facing the UPSC exam but are still, fascinated by these global dynamics, keep asking those critical questions. Who holds the power? Who benefits? And how can we work towards a more just and equitable world?
Those are the big questions. Global civil society is a force to be reckoned with, and understanding its complexities is essential for all of us, whether we're aspiring diplomats or simply, well, engaged citizens.
It's about recognizing that each of us has a role to play in shaping the future we want.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground, but the journey of understanding global civil society, it doesn't end here. There's always more to learn, more to question, and more to explore. Stay with us, and we'll wrap up this deep dive with some final thoughts and insights in just a moment. And we are back for the final part of our deep dive into global civil society. We've explored its origins, the key players, and even some of the criticisms surrounding this, well, powerful and ever-evolving force.
It's been quite a journey.
It really has. But now let's get practical. Why should all of this matter to you, especially if you're gearing up for that UPSC exam?
Well, acing the UPSC, it's not just about ticking boxes on a test, right? It's about understanding the dynamics of power, influence, and change on a global scale. And honestly, that's essential knowledge for anyone, but especially if you're aiming to be a diplomat or a policymaker shaping the future.
Right. They're not looking for robots who can just spit back facts. They want individuals who can analyze those complex situations, see different sides of an argument, and form, smart, well-supported opinions.
Exactly. So how can our listeners use this deep dive to boost their UPSC prep? Well, first, go beyond those dry definitions. Don't just define global civil society. Dig into its history.
Right. The why and the how.
Exactly. Why did it emerge? How did globalization, that post-Cold War world and, that perceived dominance of corporations, how did all of that play a role?
The UPSC loves to test your grasp of historical context.
Mhm.
It's not enough to just know what something is. You need to know WHY and how it came to be.
Precisely. Once you have that solid foundation, start exploring those different actors within global civil society. Compare and contrast those transnational movements with the NGOs. What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? How do they interact with each other? And how do they interact with those traditional power structures?
Yeah, it's all about those comparisons. And don't forget how technology has changed the game. I mean, it's mind-blowing how much impact the internet and social media have had compared to, like, just a few decades ago.
Absolutely. How have these tools allowed these groups to organize, mobilize, and, spread their message across borders? This is highly relevant in today's world, and it's something that the UPSC examiners could definitely ask about.
I'm sure they love throwing those curveball questions to see who's really been paying attention. And speaking of challenging assumptions, I think it's also crucial to engage with the criticisms of global civil society, too.
Of course, it's not a perfect system.
Right, it's not all sunshine and roses.
Ask yourself, is it truly representative of all voices? Are some groups getting more attention than others? Are these organizations truly independent, or are they being pulled in different directions by funding or alliances?
Yeah, all valid points. Like any large-scale movement, you have to, look beneath the surface and examine the power dynamics at play.
Exactly. And here's a pro tip for our UPSC folks. Use real-world examples to back up your points. Refer to specific transnational movements, talk about NGO successes and failures, mention those key events that have shaped this whole landscape.
Yeah, that's how you bring those answers to life. You're showing those examiners that you've gone beyond the textbooks and really grapples with how complex this all is in reality.
Absolutely. And remember, the UPSC exam is just as much about how you communicate as what you know. So practice explaining those concepts clearly, concisely, using your own words. Don't just regurgitate. Make those ideas your own.
Find your voice, connect those dots, and prove to them that you get the significance of global civil society in today's world.
And for our listeners who aren't facing the UPSC but are still fascinated by global affairs, remember that understanding global civil society, it can empower you to be a more informed and engaged citizen.
It's about recognizing the power we have collectively, seeing the challenges we face as a global community, and figuring out how each of us can contribute to a more just and sustainable world.
So never stop learning, stay curious, and remember that even small actions can have a ripple effect that reaches across borders.
What a fantastic note to end on. We hope this deep dive has given you a strong foundation for understanding global civil society, whether you're prepping for that UPSC or just, looking to expand your horizons.
There's always something new to discover.
There really is. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into fascinating topics that'll challenge your thinking and broaden your understanding of the world around us. See you next time.